Hey, we're back. This time we're going to be taking a look at one of my favorite games that I swore I did a video for before, but I'm looking back through things and realized I never did. But it's the Formula D by Asmodi Games. It's basically a reprint of an old French game called Formula D, and this one involves not only the Formula cars, but street racing as well. Everything else is pretty much the same. The box is all crooked. And in the base game, you get a couple maps, 2 different tracks. It supports up to 10 players, which is really nice. And you have these little dashboards, and it's just a really fun game if you're into anything racing. The gear system that they have for shifting gears and doing various things. They have a weather system. There's basically 2 different ways to play, and we'll get into those when we open it up and take a look. So inside the box there's all kinds of things. I do have a few extras in here that aren't in the main game, but I'll point those out when I get to them. But you have your rule set for beginners. Anyone who's just starting to play should basically go by these. It covers the basics of how to play, and everything's pretty simple. They don't go into a lot of detail. Like here, the car stats are done in one grid of I think 18 points instead of being split up into tires, brakes, and all your different categories and so on. But it gives you a great thing to get in and start playing. And they have a little reference sheet on the back, and it gives you everything you need to get in and play your first couple games. Then we have the rules for advanced players. These go into a lot more detail. There's everything in here from drafting, customizing your own car. You can see the dashboard there's a lot more in depth. You have tires, brakes, transmission, body, engine, and suspension. Your points get split between, so it's a lot easier to wreck your car because any one thing can get worn out instead of having to go through all 18 of the points. There's lots of special rules that pertain to the more advanced form of play. Like I said, drafting is in here and things like that. Then in the back here, there's an optional rules section. And these have all sorts of optional rules you can use to customize your game even more. Some of them pretty much everybody uses. Some of them are hit or miss depending on what you're doing. Qualifying laps, a really fun one here. There's kind of a glare there, but that one's kind of fun, but it does take time, so a lot of people skip over that. The first one up here is how to construct your own car. And then this is new for this version of the game. They have the actual named racers for the street racers. And they're different than the Formula 1 racers where everybody's the same. In this, everybody has slightly different stats because they're all driving different cars. And they also have different special abilities. And they go through some of the various different things that are different about the street racing game. There's a section on potholes. This is actually the other map that comes with the base game. Has a few special rules on it. And then on the back are all of the named drivers for the street racing and what their abilities are. These are kind of fun to play with in a friendly at-home format. They don't work so well for competitive play because some of their abilities are much better than others. But we use them every now and then when we play at home. They're kind of fun. For the most part, we skip on the special abilities, though. We do use the custom cars, though, and let people build their own. This is actually a cheat sheet that somebody from Board Game Geek made, and I printed it out and laminated it here. But it basically has all the reminders of all the various different things using the advanced rules that you're going to need. If you're playing with the basic rules, you're not going to need these, but if you are playing with the advanced rules, it's really nice to have these out, especially when you're playing with new people, because you can look up any various thing whenever they may pop up and not have to get out the rule book every time. Basically, it's just the different roles that you need for when you're doing various things, what points you lose and where, if it'll focus on there. What points you lose and where, when you're downshifting, things like that. And at the top are roles you need for damaging your car and things like that for various things. Just a neat little reminder to have. You also have those printed on smaller cards. 2 of the same things for people. And it has pretty much the same information. These are actually what I used before I printed out the big one. The big one looks cooler at the table, but These are nicer because they're smaller. Same information on there though. And again, those don't come with the game, they're just stuff I had. So the next thing we have in here, my inserts got cracked because I use this game a lot, but the next thing in here is you have your dashboards for your cars. There's 10 of them, which is really a selling point for the game in my opinion, that it supports up to 10 players. See, a lot of people play this and play multiple cars per player as well, because the more cars on the track, the more fun it is, I think. But this side is your advanced side. It's upside down. And you have your stick shift here, and it tells you what die to roll and what your possible outcomes are, depending on what gear you're in. They're not normal dice, like in this case the D4 for first gear is only a 1 to a 2, so they're on there twice. Whereas the D30 that you run for 6th gear is only 21 through 30. So you have to keep in mind there are minimums depending on which gear you're in. So that's something you need to think about when you're slowing down for turns and whatnot. On the back side of them, you have the same stick shift over here, but you have the wear points are different. You have the 18 standard wear points here for the basic gameplay instead of having them broken up into the different categories. Next we have our driver cards, and these are what I was saying were new for this edition of the game. On one side they have their stats. The stats all total the same amount, but like you can see between these two here, he has one more in transmission than he does, and so on. There's differences in all the various characters. They all have their own special ability, which you use by putting a token on here. They also have nitrous, which gives you a boost to your speed depending on which gear you're in, which is something special for just the street racers. On the flip side of all of these are your standard formula drivers. All of these guys have the exact same stats on there. This is to make your nice, fair, balanced games. And anybody can play with any. You can even mix and match the two if you want. It's generally the people pick one or the other, and that's what everybody's going to be using. But there's nothing preventing you from combining them. Again, these guys have all fair and balanced stats. These guys' stats vary from player to player. And you can also use the advanced rules to customize and make your own cars. Next thing we have here is the actual map tiles. They're actually quite huge, and I don't think I'm going to be able to get them on camera. They fold out. These actually fold out to a 6x2 here. Get the majority of it on camera. But yeah, they fold out to a 6x2, which is a huge piece. There's actually 2 of these. So your map ends up being 6x4. And it's just a giant, or 6x4 tiles. I'm not sure what the actual dimensions are, but they end up being completely huge. On this side that I'm showing here, though, we have our street racing map, which is at nighttime on city streets. On the flip side, in the starter here, you have Monaco, which you can see there. It also has weather patterns, which are one of the advanced rules. And I'll fold this up just a hair so I can get in here. On each of your corners, you have these little signs here. We'll start with this one, it's a little bit easier. And this little, you have the little spaces that you're going to count when you're moving. When you get to a corner where these red lines are, some point between these red lines and these red lines here, you'll need to stop at least once. The longest route around the corner is at the top here, shown as a 6. The shortest route through the corner is this inside lane, which is shown as a 2. You need to stop at least the number of times here, so you need to make at least one stop within this red area. If you do not, you start taking wear for everything you overshoot, and if you overshoot into the next corner, that stop doesn't count in the next corner either. So you have to time yourself as you come down the straightaway so that you know you're going to get into these areas and stop. The other thing is, on the straightaways, you're allowed to move left a lane or right a lane, or 2 lanes. You can go across, but you can't zigzag back and forth. Whereas when you get to these corners, you have to follow the arrows on the tiles you're on in the corner. So if you're on these outside, you kind of get the option to cut back inside, except for that square there. Or if you're in the inside, you really don't have an option to drift back out. So you got to make sure which lane you're in when you go in those, that you can use up your movement and stop where you need to. They get a little more complicated, like this turn down here requires 3 stops. Has a much longer long right through, much shorter short route. And you can see this turn actually starts here, goes all the way up and around to here. Somewhere between those 2 points, you need to make 3 stops. If you ever overshoot a turn by 2, you wreck and you're out of the game. So in this case, you can't overshoot a turn 1 or a 1-stop turn by 2. But this 3, say you only stopped once in that entire thing, you're gonna wreck your car and be out. You also take wear points for overshooting to your brakes, to your tires, things like that. If any of your wear points get to 0, the car wrecks as well. Different things to keep in mind. A little helpful thing, especially on these really long straightaways, along the side of the board, gives you a reference, tells you how many squares it is from the previous turn, which is all the way back here, down to there. So you can kind of guess what gear you want to be in. And it gives you a guess as how many spaces there are to the next turn. And you use those to judge what speed you want to be going as you approach those turns. There's the other half of our map. As I said, they're pretty big maps once you get them all out. Now I have this set up a little bit different under here than what it normally is. Down here you have these trays. And these you're actually going to set your dashboards into. Like so. And then you have these actual stick shifts that go in there, like so, and these are how you're going to keep track of what gear you're in. As you're accelerating, you can only go up 1 gear at a time, so at the beginning of the game you're going to start in 1st gear, you go on to 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and so on. When you go to downshift, you can only downshift 1 gear at a time. If you go more than 1, say you wanted to go from 4th down to 2nd, you're going to start damaging parts of your car and you take wear on things. Wear is kept track of by these little pegs, which I just threw on the floor, by these little pegs that go in these holes. These little pegs go in your various stats to mark them. I'm getting a weird glare from the window, sorry about that. If it'll focus. But as you take damage to various systems, you're going to move these pegs down. If any of them get to 0, bad things happen. Tires, if you get to 0, will spin you out, but then you can keep going after that. Anything else gets to 0 basically wrecks your car. And again, these are the advanced. On the flip side, you're only going to have your stick shift over here stays the same. And you're going to have these 18 wear points that you work down. So if you get to 0 on there, you wreck out. The tray itself is pretty neat if you're going to keep things the way they use them in here. You have room for everything in here. And the dice actually fit down this center column. There's a spot for each one of them. I keep mine usually stayed up on its side, so I just keep my dice in the actual bag. It's worth noting, as I did mention before, these aren't normal dice, so you can't just swap them out with any dice you have. The numbers on them are based on the gears you're in, so there are a minimum number on each of them. So like the 30-sided die here does not go 1 to 30. The only one in here that's normal is the black D20, which is used to see who goes first. It's used for starting and things like collisions and various uses. That one's just a normal D20, but even the other D20 that's in here is has a minimum number on it as well. Then we have our cars here. The models are extremely tiny. It's very, very hard to find things that to use in place of them. I think Z scale, if you're into trains and things, is about the closest thing you're going to find. And these are the street racing cars. They come in a handful of different types, and there's 2 color schemes of each type in there. And then you have your formula cars here. And there's a bunch of different color schemes of those. And I believe there's 2 of each, or 2 similar of each, because they're made to race in teams of 2. And this here is the closest I've ever been able to find to the scale of the cars. They're really difficult to find. Here's one of the ones from the actual game to compare. This is actually a Micro Machine Micro Mini. And if you're familiar with Micro Machines, which I think most people are, these actually came inside of those. They had ones that opened up, and these were parked inside. They stopped selling them after a while because they were a choking hazard, unfortunately, which kind of made them into a collector's item. So trying to find them nowadays are pretty pricey, but there was quite the selection of them available. And to really give you an idea how tiny these cars are, it's an American dime, which is the smallest coin we have, and these cars will literally park on top of it. So they're extremely small scale. If you know anybody who's into like model trains, I think Z is the closest scale you can find to these. There are companies that specifically make cars for these, but most of them make the formula style cars, not the street racing ones. So something to keep in mind, but I did buy this when I managed to find it for a couple bucks just because I like the game so much and I wanted something different. And to give you kind of an idea here, here's the entire map laid out. I actually got to pick the camera up here to show it even. They are pretty good size overall, and this is a 6x3 table it's sitting on, to give you an idea, and it takes up almost all of it. Got some junk on the end there, but and then you'll have your driver dashboards on top of that around the edges. But it gives you an idea of a course layout. There's your starting line. Well, can't angle the camera. There's the starting line. These are your positions down there. You go around, up there through those tight S's, down this long rounded straightaway, through the little curves there. Down here, a couple sharp turns at the end and back up. This here's the pit lane right through here, so you can actually pull in there and repair your car, change tires and things like that. But anyway, it does take up quite a bit of space. I just thought I would show that for reference. I guess one of the best things is just how much stuff the game comes with. You can see here everything laid out. We have our 10 street racing cars and our 10 formula cars. There's a bunch of tokens here. I really didn't go into too much. They involve being used for the various weather things, as well as when you damage a car. When you damage something on the track, sometimes it leaves debris behind that other people can run over, so there's a token for those as well. We have all 10 of our player dashboards set up here, and they all set up in the advanced mode using all the pegs. I'm not sure if it's everybody's or just mine, but they did give me a bunch of extra pegs and an extra gear shifter as well, in case something breaks. Actually got extra dashboard as well. We have all of our drivers. They're double-sided, but I got the Formula 1 drivers are showing here and the street drivers showing there. They're all double-sided, so there's actually enough to run all 10 street drivers. Our tracks in the middle there, rule books over there, all the various dice in the back there. They do sell those dice as a separate add-on. You can buy an extra set, so you don't have to pass them around as much. If I had one complaint about the game, it's that these driver trays that they use are very flimsy. They're made out of that same type of material that box inserts are usually made out of. It's usually not a problem once you get the cards in there. They're pretty sturdy as well as being all together. I also kind of skipped over that there's notches on the side of these trays, which there's kind of a shadow there, but you take your driver card that you're using and they actually fit right in those notches. And then your stats line up with each one. It tells you what to set the stats at. It's the same thing for the street drivers. But yeah, aside from the like I said, the trays are a little bit flimsy. I'm not a big fan of what they're made out of. I don't know why they couldn't have just made them plastic. Would have increased cost, but it's not a huge issue. Mine have held up for God knows how long I've been using them. The other small nitpick is that the pegs, the holes for them are way bigger than they need to be for these pegs. If they were a little bit smaller, they'd be a little bit tighter fit. They're very loose and they can be knocked around. But if they were too much tighter, they would add extra wear. So it's kind of a hit or miss thing there. I wish they were just a hair tighter though, so they didn't get bumped around as much. But honestly, those are the only nitpicky complaints I can come up with about the game. And it's just a really good all-around fun experience if you're into racing games. So that's pretty much it for Formula D. I didn't go into a lot of detail on how to play. I think I'm going to do a how to play video for this because, as I said, it is one of my favorite ones. So that might put that on my list of things to do. But it's really simple idea is you basically have to choose what gear you want to put yourself into, roll the die, move the certain amount of spaces. I'm not a huge fan of roll to move games, but because of the minimums on the certain dice, it kind of negates that to an effect. Knowing what gear you're going to be in, there's a minimum and a maximum you can roll for each gear, so it kind of alleviates some of the problems that you normally have with a roll to move game. Unless you're sitting in first gear, you're never going to roll a 1. If you're in 5th gear, you're going to be rolling 20s and things like that. The fact that it has the beginner play to learn the game as well as the advanced rolls. The beginner game is really easy to get into and play, but a lot of people are going to get bored of that really quickly because you can really play the system because you have those 18 wear points that are generic. Overshooting a corner by 5 spaces really isn't that big a detriment when you have 18 to work with. When you switch to the advanced rules and suddenly you only have 8 tires to work with, overshooting a corner by 5 spaces and burning up tires really makes a big difference when you're burning up 5 of your 8 that you have to use the entire lap on. So it adds a lot more strategy to the game. You have to slow down for turns. You have to think ahead. And again, the more cars on the track there's all sorts of little combos and things you can get into that. You may come flying up on a turn and be perfectly set yourself up to fly around that turn with no problem. Suddenly there's 3 cars wide in front of you blocking all 3 lanes. You have to slam on your brakes, which wears your brakes, which wears your tires and things like that because you don't want to run into them. Then you run the risk of running into people whenever you're adjacent to another car. There's a die you roll and there's a chance that you might bump each other, take a little bit of body damage. That adds up, things like that. Doing multiple laps makes a big difference because then the pits come into play. Do you want to lose time in the pits for the chance to redo your tires and things like that? All sorts of things come in. We actually played a couple games with my friends. We did 10 lap races, which I will tell you take a long time. I don't recommend anybody does more than 2 laps, maybe 3 on some of the shorter courses if they're really into the game. We love the game, so when I get together with the guys, we don't mind playing long races, but yeah, there is a very long time. Big thing is to whoever the active player is the next player in line needs to be figuring out what they want to do, choosing their path they want to go. You pretty much know everything you're going to do except for exactly how many spaces you're going to move, but you know what gear you're going to be in, what die you're going to roll, pick your path. Makes the game go a lot faster. There really isn't too much downtime in between player turns. It's all in who's ready to go when their turn comes around. If you wait until it's your turn and then look at the board and try to figure out where you're going to go, you're going to slow things down for everybody. Another neat mechanic is that whoever's in last place gets to go first, and they go through until everybody's had a turn, and then you figure out again who's in last place. That person goes first. So the last place person rotates every turn. It's kind of a neat thing too. But overall, it's a really fun game. And one of the cool things, which I really didn't go into too much, is but right in the main box you come with Monaco and then that street racing circuit, which I can't remember what it is. I want to say it's Chicago. Something like that. I think they call it Night City or something now. They changed it. But anyway, those 2 tracks come in the box, which gives you one race course and one street racing course. On top of that, the game has the option to buy tons of expansions that are out. Between this, I think there's 6 expansions for this game itself, and there's tons of other ones for Formula Day, but those tend to be a lot more expensive because they're out of print, but you can always print and play too. And to give you an idea, these are some of the ones I have here. Each one of these expansions, this is number 1 here, they're numbered so you can keep track of them. Comes with 2 tracks. This one has Sebring and Chicago. They show you the basic map overlays there on the back, but it basically comes with all the boards. There's not much to these. A lot of people expect them to come in a box or everything, which is, I was kind of disappointed the first time. It's literally just a cardboard cover and then the map pieces inside. But they're worth picking up. They're usually like 20 bucks or so. It's worth picking them up just to have multiple boards. We actually started a league a while back where we run on 1 track each week, and they run through an entire season just like you would in real racing. Some of them, like Chicago here, have special rules. This one actually has an intersection. Any of the ones that come with special rules have their own little books that explain how the special rules work. That's always an interesting section right there, those highway ramps. And any of those that have special rules, we're going to come right in them. But right now, these are all the ones that are available right now. Like I said, we have Sebring and Chicago here. Number 2 is probably the hardest one to come by because all the classic fans like it. It's, I'm going to mess it up, but it's Hockenheimring and Valencia. which are 2 actual racetracks. Most of the other expansions, I think all of the other expansions, come with 1 street racing track and 1 actual track. This one's the only one that comes with 2 tracks, which is part of the reason it's so popular and hard to come by, but that's number 2. Number 3 is the Singapore and the docks. Again, one track, 1 street racing. Number 4 is the Grand Prix of Baltimore and Bud. Not sure how to say that. These ones, I think that one is supposed to be a street race, but to be honest, they both work as tracks. That one's a very fun track to drive on. Lots of long straightaways. This one has one of the longest straightaways that I've seen in the entire game, except for custom tracks. That's a great one because you really can pick up some speed down this, but there's tight turns that you got to compensate for. Number 5 is New Jersey and Sochi. Jersey is kind of a fun track there. Sochi, this was actually from when the Olympics were in Sochi, so it goes around the Olympic Village. And then the last one that's out right now is Austin and Nevada Ride. And Austin's a pretty cool track here. Nevada Ride's interesting. It has this big jump in here. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a jump in there where you jump basically the Grand Canyon. And it also has somewhere, which I can't find on here by looking at it, somewhere in here there's people in a town, and you actually have to avoid the people because they come out onto the road. Can't really see because it's so small, but yeah, there's a section where there's people out on the road, and there's a section up here where there's debris on the sides of the road. It's kind of an interesting one, a little bit different, but fun if you're into that street racing stuff. But the tracks themselves are good for anybody. Anyway, that's going to about wrap it up for Formula D. As I said, it's a really fun game if you're into cars, if you're into racing. It's probably one of the best implementations of racing as far as a board game goes. There is a roll to move. Some people are turned off by that, but as I said, there's mitigation for that in this. It's not as bad as it sounds. I really like the advanced rules where you can customize and build your own car. And in a league play, like I was saying, we run 1 track each week. We have 12 tracks from the expansion packs, 2 tracks from in here. It's a lot of variety, not even getting into the previous tracks and things out there. So it makes it a different experience every time, as well as messing around with the various drivers and abilities there. We tend to use street racing rules so we can have nitrous and things and let people customize their cars. It's kind of fun that way around. Everybody gets the nitrous, so if somebody falls far behind, they have a way to catch back up. And the customizing allows you to adjust your car per track. On a track with a lot of long straightaways, you might want to put a little bit more into your transmission or engine because you tend to damage those. There's a possibility when you're running in higher gears flat out. And a track that has a lot of tight turns and things, you're going to want more brakes, more tires, things like that. So just a really fun aspect to it. Anyway, if you're into racing, check it out. Keep an eye on my channel. I'll probably have a how-to play up there eventually. I just can't believe I went this long and never actually reviewed the original game. But definitely its big draw is the 10-player support. And even without 10 players, if you're playing with less, I always recommend 2 cars a person after you've got the basics down. The more cars that are on the track, the more fun it is. Especially if you're playing like team-based racing, you can use your own cars to draft off of and things like that. But anyway, that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the next one.